The Taliban allowing the first commercial flight with 200 foreigners on board to leave, among those on board Americans. And former acting head of Homeland Security says the department has veered off course by focusing on domestic rather than international terrorism. A new generation learning the history of 9/11. That's the goal of the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And what are the 6 steps under President Biden's new 6-step plan to fight the virus? Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. The Taliban allowing the first commercial flight with foreigners on board to leave. There's 200 people on board, including Americans. The Qatar Airways Boeing 777 left Kabul Thursday, heading for Doha. Other international flights are expected in the coming days. The U.S. has been trying to get its citizens and allies out of Afghanistan, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying on Wednesday the Taliban wasn't allowing flights to depart because some people did not have the proper documents. And as to the actions of the Taliban, the international community has been keeping a close eye. The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg speaking on how the organization plans to pressure the Taliban. He recently said the Taliban must make good on their commitments on terrorism, human rights, and safe passage for those who wish to leave Afghanistan.
Of course, our leverage is not the same as it was when we had military troops on the ground, but we still have leverage, economic, diplomatic, political leverage on Taliban, and we will use that as an international community to press them on all these issues.
He went on to say the focus is now on how to continue the fight against terrorism.
One of the issues we are discussing at NATO now is how can NATO step up? How can we do even more in the fight against terrorism? And we have proven that we are able to fight terrorism also in countries where we don't have thousands of troops on the ground, and now we have to do that.
Now, speaking of the fight against terrorism, the former acting head of Homeland Security Chad Wolf is speaking out. Wolf says the department is now veering off course by, quote, chasing the shiny object. That shiny object, according to Wolf, is domestic terrorism. He says the department should focus on international terrorism. His comments came at a 9/11 anniversary event hosted by the Heritage Foundation on Tuesday. He went on to say the department's first ever comprehensive threat assessment, published in October 2020, highlighted threats from China and Russia. He says domestic terrorism has been, quote, blown out of proportion. As to what domestic terrorism is, Wolf says it's, quote, committing crimes that are intended to force your ideology on a population or on a government. That's in contrast to international terrorism. He says it might be hard for some Americans to comprehend that there were individuals and organizations whose sole mission is to harm America. He said China and Russia were examples of that, adding, I don't think that can be overstated enough. As to Afghanistan, Wolf says it will be a black hole for U.S. Homeland Security. That's given the country has become a safe haven for terrorists and that America has withdrawn its diplomatic presence there. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Wednesday defended the White House's continued engagement with a Taliban government that includes an FBI most wanted terrorist.
Should we not talk to the people who are overseeing Afghanistan and just leave it and not get the rest of the American citizens out?
Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying the focus now is setting expectations for the Taliban.
Our focus right now is on working with the international community to set clear expectations for the government that emerges in Afghanistan.
He says future relations will depend on the Taliban's actions and whether they uphold their promises. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Thursday that al-Qaeda may try to take root in Afghanistan again.
I think the whole community is kind of watching to see what happens and whether or not al-Qaeda has the ability to regenerate in Afghanistan.
He says the State Department put the Taliban on notice, and they expect the militant group not to allow that to happen. Now, what about the Afghan refugees who have made it to the U.S.? Over 40 Republican lawmakers are raising concerns about the DHS's vetting process of Afghan evacuees. They say the databases the agency is using has failed to accurately screen illegal immigrants wanted for murder in the past. Dozens of congressional Republicans are concerned about what they called a rushed and incomplete vetting of evacuees from Afghanistan. In a letter to President Biden on Wednesday, they write, "This vetting has already failed in the case of Afghan nationals. An Afghan male convicted of rape in the United States and deported by DHS was evacuated from Kabul, allowed to enter the United States, and not caught until he arrived at Washington." They did say the United States should honor its promises to Afghan allies who have applied for special immigrant visas. Biden has picked veteran diplomat Lee Wolosky to help coordinate the resettlement of refugees. And now that the 20-year war in Afghanistan has drawn to a close, what about the event that started it? In the 20 years since September 11, 2001, a new wave of young people has grown up without truly grasping the impact of that infamous day. At the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, President and CEO Alice Greenwald has the task of educating this new generation.
For those of us who witnessed 9/11 20 years ago, it's seared into our consciousness. We cannot ever not remember what our eyes saw. But for this generation, it's history to be learned.
Ahead of this year's anniversary, the museum and memorial launched a new educational campaign and fundraiser called the Never Forget Fund. Money donated to the Never Forget Fund will support educational campaigns to teach young people about the attack and the global aftermath.
So 9/11, this memorial, this museum, tells a story about the best of human nature in response to the worst.
Every year, the 9/11 Museum and Memorial leads the nation's remembrance by reading the names of those killed. The ceremony includes 6 moments of silence for when each of the World Trade Center towers was struck and collapsed, as well as the attack on the Pentagon and the crash of Flight 93 in Pennsylvania.
And we need to remind this generation that they have the capacity for unity, for hope, and for resilience when faced with challenges that you couldn't imagine.
In the evening, the annual tribute and light will shine from where the towers once stood. There is some concern that after the 20th anniversary, interest in September 11th will fade. Greenwald said the 9/11 Memorial and Museum will make sure we never forget. And today, President Biden announced the new mandates under his 6-pronged plan to combat the virus. So what are the 6 steps? 1, vaccinating the unvaccinated. Right now, a little more than 62% of people 12 and up are fully vaccinated.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. So please do the right thing.
This part of the plan focuses on vaccine requirements, including building upon the ones already in place for many federal workers and pressing private businesses to do the same. That includes signing an executive order that requires all federal workers, as well as any contractor who works with the government, to get vaccinated against the virus. The requirement ends exemptions for those willing to get tested regularly, which an earlier policy allowed for. 2, furthering protection for the vaccinated. That means booster shots, once they're approved. 3, a focus on keeping schools open. 4, increasing testing and requiring masking. That includes a major expansion to free COVID testing to help contain the virus. That's as kids return to school and workers to offices. Officials say that means expanded access to testing and wading into the heated debate over masking in schools. 5, economic recovery. That includes encouraging private businesses to follow Biden's lead on vaccine requirements.
The Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated or show a negative test at least once a week.
6, improving care for those with COVID-19 so far. That's meant at helping hospitals inundated with patients. And now, before we end, a 4-year-old dog has become South Korea's first honorary rescue dog after the dog Baku saved its 90-year-old owner when she collapsed in a rice field. Hidden from view by the rice, she was drenched and unable to get up. Baku stayed by her side for 40 hours, keeping her temperature up even as she began experiencing symptoms of hypothermia. Using a thermal drone, authorities spotted the little dog's body, leading them to the woman's location. She is now recovering in hospital. Baku was awarded for his courage, becoming the country's first ever honorary rescue dog. The incident happened in South Korea's Hongseong County on August 25th. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.